My parents told me I'd never succeed, now they want my help. Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd actually write something like this, but after the week I've had, I honestly don't know where else to turn. I'm 32, single, and for the first time in my life, I feel like I've got some stability. I have a good job in tech, after years of feeling like I'd never be able to hold anything down, a comfortable apartment, and a handful of people I can genuinely call friends. On paper, my life is more or less together, something I couldn't have imagined growing up. I always thought I'd be stuck, struggling forever, because, well, that's what I was told. See, my parents spent most of my childhood telling me I'd never amount to anything. I was the kid who couldn't focus, never finished what he started, and just didn't have what it takes. There wasn't a single parent-teacher conference where my dad didn't sigh and say, loud enough for me to hear, "He's just not built for this stuff." My mom would add, "We tried everything, but he just doesn't listen. He's always going to struggle." For a long time, I believed them. It got under my skin in a way I still can't fully shake. The worst part was, it wasn't just the big moments. They never missed a chance to point out my flaws, even in the smallest things. If I brought home a B instead of an A, it was proof I was not working hard enough. If I wanted to try something new, it was a waste of time. Their voices, their disappointment, shaped everything about how I saw myself. But after years of crawling, failing, and fighting my way through, I found something that worked. I clawed my way out and built a life I'm actually proud of. Now, after so many years of silence, my parents have come back into my life. And for the first time ever, it's not to criticize, but to ask for help. They need me, and I don't know what I'm supposed to feel or do. To really explain where I'm at now, I have to go back to where it started. I know some people grow up with parents who push them, maybe a little too hard, but deep down there's love. That was never the case with mine. With my parents, everything felt conditional. Love, attention, even the smallest bit of praise. They only ever showed it to me when I did exactly what they wanted. Otherwise, I got indifference at best and flat-out disappointment at worst. Some of my earliest memories are just of sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my math homework until my head hurt. My dad would stand over me, arms crossed, waiting for me to mess up so he could take the pencil away and do it himself, muttering about how some kids just don't have it. If I asked for help, I was told I should have been listening the first time. If I stayed quiet, I was lazy and unmotivated. My mom wasn't any better. I remember begging her to come to my school play in the 3rd grade. She said she'd be there, but at the last minute she had to work late. Later, I overheard her on the phone telling my aunt, "He's just not like other kids. He's not a leader. He can barely follow directions." I still hear that phrase sometimes, like it's tattooed inside my skull. Every year, I'd watch my classmates' parents show up at games and concerts, cheering in the audience, bringing flowers, or taking them out for ice cream after. Mine never did. It was like they wanted me to disappear into the background, because that was easier than facing the reality of having a kid who didn't fit their mold. Looking back, I know they had their own struggles. Money was always tight, and my dad worked long hours at a job he hated. But instead of being a team, our family just felt like 3 strangers under one roof, all silently wishing things were different. To really explain where I'm at now, I have to go back. I know some people grow up with parents who push them, maybe too hard, but deep down there's love. That wasn't the case with mine. Everything felt conditional: love, attention, praise. It only came if I did exactly what they wanted. Otherwise, at best, indifference, at worst, disappointment. Some of my earliest memories are of sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my homework while my dad stood over me, arms crossed, just waiting for me to screw up. If I asked for help, I was told, "You should have been listening the first time." If I stayed quiet, I was lazy and unmotivated. My mom was the same. I remember begging her to come to my school play in 3rd grade. She promised, then had to work late. Later, I overheard her tell my aunt, "He's just not like other kids. He can barely follow directions." That line stuck with me for years. My classmates' parents cheered them on at games and plays. Mine never showed up. Our house felt like 3 strangers living together, never a real family. Looking back, maybe they had their own problems. But it doesn't make the loneliness and doubt any less real. School only made things worse. Teachers would call on me, and my mind would go blank. Not because I didn't know, but because I was so used to feeling wrong. If I brought home a test with anything less than an A, my dad would sigh and say, "What did I tell you? Not everyone's cut out for academics." If I did well, it was just luck or finally putting in real effort for once. I remember once, in middle school, I won third place in a science fair. I was actually proud, until I showed my parents the ribbon. My mom looked at it and said, "Well, third isn't first." Then she put it away in a drawer and never mentioned it again. That tiny bit of happiness just evaporated. By high school, I stopped telling them about my interests. I wanted to try art club, but my dad laughed and asked, "And how's that going to pay the bills?" Anytime I dared to dream, it was shot down fast. After a while, it felt safer not to try at all, because failing in silence hurt less than failing in front of them. I started believing maybe they were right. Maybe I really was never going to be good enough. Things didn't magically change when I turned 18. If anything, the pressure got worse. My parents didn't want to pay for college. They said it would be a waste of money because I wasn't college material. They encouraged me to get a job straight out of high school, preferably something simple that wouldn't set me up for failure. So I did. My first job was at a local grocery store, stacking shelves and cleaning up spills. I actually liked having my own money, even if it wasn't much. But whenever I talked about taking classes or looking at community college, my parents rolled their eyes. "Save your energy," my mom said. "Some people aren't meant for higher education." At work, though, I noticed something strange. I wasn't as hopeless as I thought. My manager trusted me to handle deliveries and train new hires. For the first time, someone seemed to think I was capable. That feeling, small as it was, planted a tiny seed in me. Maybe I didn't have to accept my parents' version of who I was. But every time I went home, their doubts dragged me right back down. I started saving every extra dollar I could. One night, after another argument about my lack of ambition, I quietly filled out an application for night classes at the local community college. I didn't tell anyone. I just showed up, sat in the back, and tried to absorb everything. The first semester was rough. I worked mornings at the store, went to class in the evenings, and crashed in bed at midnight. But slowly, something changed. I passed my classes. I made a couple of friends who didn't know my family or my past. Nobody at college saw me as a failure. They just saw a guy working hard to catch up. For the first time, I felt a sense of control. I started thinking, maybe I could build something for myself, even if it was just brick by brick. But back home, my parents still thought I was wasting my time. The turning point came in my second year of night classes. My academic advisor suggested I apply for a scholarship. I laughed it off. Me, win a scholarship? But she insisted, and for once, I let myself hope. I spent weeks perfecting my essay, submitting my grades, and not telling my parents a word. When the acceptance letter came, with enough money to cover tuition for the next year, I almost didn't believe it. I remember sitting in my car outside the mailbox, just holding the envelope and shaking. For the first time in my life, someone outside my family had looked at me and seen potential. When I told my parents, their reaction was lukewarm at best. My dad just shrugged. My mom said, "Well, don't blow it. No congratulations, no pride." But something inside me shifted that day. I realized I didn't need their approval as much as I thought. That's when I decided to move out. I found a tiny studio apartment near campus. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Packing my things, I felt scared, but also free. I was finally putting distance between myself and their voices. Living alone was both terrifying and liberating. I had never been responsible for everything: rent, bills, groceries, but I was determined not to give up. There were nights I ate instant noodles for dinner and wondered if I'd made a huge mistake. I missed the security of a full fridge, even if it came with constant criticism. But I started to figure things out. I took on more hours at work, squeezed studying into every spare moment, and slowly built a routine. The silence in my apartment was different than the silence at home. This one felt peaceful, not heavy. Without my parents hovering, I actually started to believe in myself a little. My grades improved. I volunteered for group projects, and even spoke up in class. Each tiny win felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they'd convinced me I didn't have. I get the occasional call from my parents, mostly to ask if I was managing or to remind me not to mess things up. I kept the conversations short. For the first time, I realized their doubts were their problem, not mine. It wasn't easy, but I kept pushing forward. The next big leap came when one of my professors encouraged me to apply for an internship at a local tech company. I almost didn't even try. The voice in my head sounded suspiciously like my dad, saying, "You're just going to embarrass yourself." But my professor believed in me, so I pushed through the self-doubt and sent in my application. To my surprise, I got the interview. I prepped like crazy, borrowed a dress shirt from a friend, and walked in absolutely terrified. But I made it through. When they offered me the position, I was so stunned I almost asked if they were sure. That internship was life-changing. For the first time, I worked somewhere that challenged me in a good way. My supervisor actually listened to my ideas and gave feedback that helped me grow. I learned more in 6 months than I had in years of school and odd jobs. It was the first time I really saw a future for myself. A future I'd chosen, not one forced on me by someone else's expectations or doubts. And when my parents found out, they barely reacted. But it didn't matter as much anymore. After my internship, things started moving faster than I could have imagined. I finished my associate's degree and was offered a full-time job at the company where I'd interned. The salary wasn't huge, but it was enough for me to stop worrying about rent and bills. For the first time, I could even save a little every month. I started to build a life that was truly mine. I made friends at work who liked me for who I was, not who my parents thought I should be. I took up new hobbies, things I'd never dared try before, like hiking and photography. My confidence grew, little by little, with every risk I took and every small victory I earned. There were setbacks, of course. Sometimes I'd make a mistake at work and immediately hear my parents' voices in my head, telling me I'd blown my chance. But my new environment was different. People supported me, helped me learn, and didn't judge me for not being perfect. Eventually, I finished my bachelor's degree while working. No one in my family had ever done that. My parents never congratulated me, but my coworkers threw a little celebration at the office. It felt like I'd finally proven, at least to myself, that I was capable of more than they'd ever believed. As the years passed, my contact with my parents became less and less frequent. I called on holidays out of obligation, sent the occasional birthday card, but our conversations were shallow and awkward. There was always an unspoken wall between us, so much left unsaid, so much history neither of us wanted to revisit. Every once in a while, my mom would make a passive comment. "We hardly ever see you anymore," or "Don't forget where you came from." My dad mostly stayed quiet, sounding tired or distracted when we spoke. They never asked about my work, my friends, or my life in any meaningful way. If I brought up an achievement, it was usually met with a simple, "That's nice," and quickly followed by silence. I try not to take it personally. Over time, I learned to stop seeking their approval or hoping for the praise I'd always wanted as a kid. Instead, I built my own support system, relying on friends, mentors, and coworkers who genuinely cared about my well-being. Still, there was always a lingering ache, a quiet hope that maybe, someday, my parents would see me for who I'd become, not just the kid they thought would never make it. Then, about 6 months ago, everything changed. I got a call from my mom out of the blue, late on a Sunday night. At first, I thought something terrible had happened, because she never called unless it was important. Her voice was shaky. She sounded smaller than I'd ever heard her. She started with small talk, awkward and forced. Then she got to the point. My dad had lost his job. He was struggling to find new work at his age, and their savings were running out fast. Medical bills were piling up, and they were falling behind on their mortgage. For the first time, my mom asked for my help. Not advice, not just a favor, but actual financial support. I was stunned. My parents had spent years telling me I'd never be able to take care of myself, and now they needed me to take care of them. The irony was so thick I almost laughed, but instead, I just listened as she explained their situation. She tried to be gentle about it, but the desperation in her voice was obvious. She asked if I could maybe help out, just until things get better. My dad didn't come to the phone at all. When I hung up, I just sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. After that call, I was overwhelmed by a storm of emotions I wasn't ready for. At first, there was shock. After all those years of hearing I wasn't good enough, now they were depending on me. I felt angry too. All the old memories came rushing back. Every harsh word, every time they'd made me feel worthless, every moment they'd dismissed my efforts. But beneath the anger, I also felt something closer to guilt, or maybe responsibility. These were still my parents, no matter what had happened between us. I kept thinking about all the times I'd wish they would finally need me, that maybe if they did, I'd finally get some recognition. Now the moment was here, and it didn't feel good at all. I barely slept that night. My mind kept jumping between wanting to help them, because it felt like the right thing to do, and wanting to just shut them out, the way they'd shut me out for most of my life. I thought about calling them back and letting out everything I'd bottled up for years. I thought about ignoring their calls and moving on, but I couldn't do either. I was trapped between anger and compassion, pride and pain. Over the next few days, I avoided their calls. I went to work, acted normal, but inside I was a mess. Friends noticed something was off. When I finally told one of them what was happening, she just listened quietly, then said, "You don't owe them anything. Not after what you've been through." That stuck with me. For so long, I'd wanted to prove myself to my parents, to finally be enough in their eyes. But now, when they needed me, I wasn't sure if helping them would heal anything, or just reopen old wounds. Eventually, I called my mom back. The conversation was strained. She apologized in her own way. Not for the past, but for having to ask. I wanted to hear her say she was proud of me, or that she regretted how things had been. Instead, she just said, "We're in a bad spot." We didn't know who else to turn to. My dad still didn't get on the phone. I thought about all the times he'd criticized me, all the opportunities he said I'd never have. Now, the roles were reversed. I was the one with choices, and I realized I didn't know what I actually wanted to do. I needed time to figure out whether helping them would bring closure or just more pain. After a lot of soul-searching, I decided to help them, but with boundaries. I set up a monthly transfer to cover their mortgage for a few months, just enough to keep them afloat while my dad looked for work. I made it clear this wasn't open-ended, and that I couldn't fix everything for them. I told them I'd help with the house, but that was all I could do. The first time the money went through, my mom called to say thank you. It was awkward. She sounded relieved, but there was no talk of the past, no real gratitude for the years I'd struggled on my own. Still, I could tell she was surprised I'd said yes. Helping them didn't bring the closure I'd hoped for. If anything, it brought up old wounds and new frustrations. I kept wondering if they finally saw me as capable, or just as a last resort. My dad still wouldn't speak to me directly. I realized I'd probably never get the apology or the acknowledgement I'd wanted all my life. But I also saw that helping them didn't mean I owed them everything, or that I had to forget what happened. I was helping because I could, and because I wanted to do what felt right for me, not for their approval. It's been a few months since all this happened. My parents are still struggling, but things have stabilized a bit. My mom sends the occasional text updating me about my dad's job search or asking for advice on bills. The conversations are still awkward, mostly transactional, and there's a distance that hasn't gone away. I've realized that I can't change the past or make my parents become the people I always wished they were. What I can do is protect the life I've built, set boundaries, and help when I'm able, on my terms. If you're reading this and you've been through something similar, here's my advice. You don't owe your parents a second chance just because you finally succeeded on your own. It's okay to help if it feels right, but don't let guilt or old wounds drive your decisions. Healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes, it's about giving yourself the love and respect you never got as a kid and choosing what's healthiest for you now. Thanks for reading, Reddit. If anyone's got advice or just wants to share their own story, I'm listening.